Now, the authors suggest that there are 3 question types that can be asked: open, guided, and closed questions. While there is a tendency to start with closed questions that might have a single right or wrong answer, the authors actually recommend starting broad and narrowing down to the more focused closed questions. So you might be asking, well, what are the open, guided, and closed questions? So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. So they suggest the purpose of starting with an open question is to kind of gather information. So kind of like assessing what somebody knows. So you might be assessing understanding or intent, or just to kind of gain clarification on whatever it is that a kid is working on. This is a quote from page 30. Quote, "Answers to open questions tell us where our students are, what they know, and what they can recognize." End quote. So here's some examples of some questions that you might ask that can be related to computer science education that might be considered as more open questions. So after a student runs the program, you might ask, "What do you think?" Or something like, "What does this program or project do?" "How would you describe your project to a friend?" "If you were to create a new project based on this one, what would you do?" So those are some quick examples of open questions that you might ask when working with kids. So on page 30, they suggest that guiding questions are used to, quote, "elicit more targeted responses from students," end quote. And here's another quote from the same page. Quote, "While guided questions remains a student-centered activity, the teacher assumes responsibility for guiding learning, for helping students discover and uncover new information," end quote. So the purpose of a guiding question might be to get kids to kind of discover or uncover an understanding that they're working on. So here are some potential examples that you might use that might be considered guided questions. So if making a game, you might ask, "What makes this game fun to play?" Or if making an animation with code, you might ask, "How did your code work together to animate a sprite?" Or even asking questions about specific concepts. So for example, how might you include variables in your project? What about conditionals? How might you include those in your project? Now, closed questions often only have one correct answer. And here's a modified version of a quote to make it more relevant to CS education. This is from page 30. Quote, "Ideally, teachers ask these questions to draw attention to a particular computer science concept, practice, or feature in a program that guided questions have failed to uncover," end quote. So for example, after asking a series of guide questions, you could pose questions like, "Nobody mentioned the use of conditionals in this project. What are the conditionals used for?" Or, "Why do we need a variable in this particular function?" Or something like, "How many functions are running in parallel to animate the sprite?" So those are all examples of some closed questions. And so you'll notice it just goes from, as the name suggests, more open-ended with the open questions to more closed-ended in terms of right or wrong answers, but still kind of getting kids to kind of think deeper about what it is that they're working on. So here's another quote from page 30, and it's modified. Quote, "Questions like these do not halt discussions, but they do help to fill in missing pieces and give students a more complete grasp of the project they are examining," end quote.